Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem Yisparach, we're starting Gemara Beitza. Is it Gimel Elul now? Okay. Beitza Shnolda B'Yom Tov. So an egg that was born on Yom Tov. Beishamai Omrim Te'achel. Beishamai holds it can be eaten on Yom Tov. Beis Hillel Omrim Lo Te'achel. And Beis Hillel says it may not be eaten. So, normally Beis Shammai is strict. Beis Shammai's opinion is more strict than Beis Hillel. And there are those that say it says in Svarim. No one knows which Svarim it's written in, but they say that when Mashiach comes, we're going to pass him like Beis Shammai. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But from a certain statement of Reb Chaim, I have my doubts about that because
No, wait. Now we go by whom?
Beit Hillel,
Oh, okay.
Beis Hillel, yeah. So there's
By the way, I told you what's the difference.
yeah, you told me, but
That's why it's opposite.
so just this is a small tangent. The Rambam doesn't count uh remembering Mitzrayim every night in Sefer Mitzvos. And we know that there's the Mishnah in that we say it in the Seder, and it's the end of the first parak of Brachos, uh, that Rabbi Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Reni Kiven Shivim Shana. V'lo zachisi shetemer yitzias Mitzrayim b'leila satrasha ben Zoma. Yimei chayacha Yemei chayacha yamim kol yemei chayacha halelos. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, I'm like 70 years old. That the Gemara says, or that he was 18 years old, he became the Nasi, and then overnight his beard became white, so he looked like he was elderly. So like a person for the prestigious position of the Rosh Hashiva, uh, he didn't know a source that we would mention that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim every night, and we know we say it in Kriya Shema in the third parak of Shema, the Tzitzis parsha. Until Ben Zoma made a drasha. Kol Yemei Chayacha, the days of your life, Kol Yemei Chayacha, all includes the night. And the Chachamim said, I think Yemei Chayacha is Olam Hazeh and Kol Yemei Chayacha to include Mashiach. Because there's a reason to think that when Mashiach comes, it's going to be such big miracles, it's going to make Mitzrayim pale by comparison. So why doesn't the Rambam say that we have an obligation to count every day? So one of Reb Chaim Brisker's answers was, it's part of the mitzvah Kriya Shema. It's not its own mitzvah, it's obligation, it's part of Kriya Shema. But a different answer he said is that when there's a machlokus between the majority and a singular opinion, we usually pass with the majority. According to the Chachamim, we don't we would pass with the Chachamim that there is no mitzvah to do it at night. And actually, it's because of that. If the mitzvah is going to change, there's the mitzvah is one way until Mashiach comes. It's a different way after Mashiach comes. So then a mitzvah has to be permanent. So if it's going to be different, it wouldn't work. So at least mitzvahs wouldn't change, or else it wouldn't be counted as. I mean, it wouldn't be counted as one of the 613. Let's say stuff about the Mishkan only applied in the time of the Mishkan, and not necessarily when there was a Beis Hamikdash. So some of those things were mitzvah just for that time. So it's not counted in the 613 according to the Rambam, because one of the 613 is permanent. But to say that we would pass, it's true, it's not a mitzvah to say that we pass like Beis Hillel before Mashiach, Miss Shammai after Mashiach, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, so that's the topic of our Mishnah. Now, I mean, that's the topic of our Masechta. Now, the Gemara is going to bring two more psakim right now about machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, because these other two cases are.
By the way, the siyum is for what we finished.
What we finished. So see you. This is a completely new, separate topic, mostly about Yom Tov. So once this machlokas Beis Shammai is more lenient than Beis Hillel, we're going to mention two other cases where Beis Shammai is more lenient than Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai omrim soor b'kizayis v'chametz b'koseves. So we're not allowed to. So soor we translate as sourdough a lot of times, and there's chametz. So I think I'm not an expert in this at all, but it seems to me that people who make sourdough bread, they have whatever their starter, and they take a chunk of that out and put it in their bread instead of using yeast. So that's seor. So there's a vera against having chametz, and there's a on Pesach, and there's a vera against having seor. So if you have seor, according to Beis Shammai, the amount of seor that you violate owning it on Pesach is an olive's volume, the chametz b'koseves. And to have chametz, which is traditionally leavened bread that's more than 18 minutes, even without yeast or less even with yeast. So that would be koseves, a koseves. That's the volume of a date, and that's bigger than, excuse me, that's smaller. Wait, what?
Should be small.
It should be smaller. No, it's bigger than a zayas.
Oh, that.
It's bigger than an olive.
Yeah,
The Beitza omrim zev zev kazayas. And Beitza says both of them are you're violate having chametz or seor on Pesach if you have a kazayas. So Beis Shammai is a little bit more lenient that he says having actual chametz is the amount of a date, which is a little more than Beis Hillel says. And hashochet chayev of b'yom tov, if you slaughter a wild animal like a deer or a bird on Yom Tov, so there's a halacha that when you shecht a bird or a chaya, you have an obligation of kisoy adam. So the blood that comes out from the makom hashchita, you have to cover it with earth, with dirt. You don't have to cover the blood of a behema like a sheep or a cow or a bull. You don't have to cover a behema, but chay and oaf you have to cover it with earth. But to move dirt around on Shabbos might be a tolda of plowing or this or that. So you can't move dirt on Shabbos. That some people don't sweep their floors on Shabbos, but our floors nowadays, it's not really an issue because our floors are hard. Here, use this Gemara. Yours didn't come yet, so okay. It'll come for next week. So if you shaft it, you're not. So there's an obligation of covering the blood, but you're not allowed to move the earth to cover the blood. So Beishamai omrim yachbar bedeker v'chase. You can use a hoe or some type of tool to move the dirt and cover it on Yantif.
But that's different than
Meaning you're allowed to do that on Yantif.
not a Shabbos.
Well, you wouldn't be able to shecht on Shabbos either. But Yantif, in order to have fresh meat, you're allowed to shecht on. But the problem is that normally you're not allowed to I think according to most things, you couldn't, depending on what it was, you couldn't necessarily pick something on Yantif. I mean, we'll learn it later, but let's say an apple, you pick and you eat it. If you were going to harvest wheat, you can't harvest wheat on Yantif, so you probably can't pick a apple else. But we'll learn later because to wheat, then you're going to have to smush it and separate it and winnow it and grind it and mill it and all that stuff. That will take away from your Yantif if you're doing all that stuff. So
how about the knife? Doesn't the shaykh that you have to sharpen it sometimes?
yeah, but I mean it's if it's a small thing, so I mean there is a little bit of, I mean there's let's say to sharpen it on Shabbos, which obviously you can't shecht with it. Actually, a shechita knife is muktzah on Shabbos because things that are very valuable professional items are usually muktzah on Shabbos. There's different categories of muktzah, or let's say a telescope. Even if a telescope, nothing muktzah is happening, but because it's a very expensive, delicate instrument, it's just muktzah because it's a valuable thing like that. So a shechita knife, I think in general, well, you can't shaft on Shabbos, so it might be klisham lafdol iser. But to sharpen the knife on Shabbos might include, I don't know if it would or not. It might include makah patish, the final hammer blow. But the thing is, since we know that a knife gets dulled over time, I don't know if you can have a final hammer blow that we know that's going to get undone and need to be done again. But yeah, I mean, if you could sharpen the shechita knife needs to be sharpened on Yantif, we'll have to see if that's mutter or not.
The karbonos for Shabbos needs to be prepared before Shabbos?
No, there are a lot. There's a special Xeris Akasuv that they're allowed to shacht in the Beis Hamikdash, but that's only the required. No one's allowed to bring a voluntary korban on Shabbos.
Right.
Just the communal korbanos can be brought. So according to Beis Shammai, you can cover the dirt. Sounds like a pretty normal manner. We're not worried it's yantif. You're not allowed to shacht unless you had dirt that was prepared from before yantif. So you had a pail that you put dirt in. So after you shaft, you just pour over the pail. You're not going to be taking any dirt off the ground in order to cover the blood. So you have to be prepared. So Beis Shammai is more lenient than Beis Hillel. Umodim, but they agree, Chaim Shachat, if you shafted without having dirt ready, then you can use the hoe and cover it, kira muchanhu, because ashes of a stove are already ready before yantif that could be used. So the Gemara will explain why, but basically because you do have something that's available, so the ashes from under your wood stove, burning stove, are available, so you have something that's available. So we'll see. The Gemara will explain later why that makes it okay. Now there was one Shabbos when I was for many Shabbos I was in Mea Shearim. One Shabbos I actually saw a UN truck drive Lahachis down Rehov Mea Shearim on a Friday night. The white car with the UN. I don't remember if it was a Toyota, like all these ones that were used on October 8th, whatever. But I mean October 7th. But so I don't know if I don't know if I saw anyone throw stones, but the thing is, regular stones are usually muksa. They have no purpose. So they said, and I heard this before that the kids who were throwing stones at the cars that were driving on Shabbos, they had stones prepared before Shabbos, so it's not muksa. Now I don't know how that works, because are they going to stay at the very same spot the whole Shabbos in case a car comes and they're going to throw at it? I don't know.
I always wondered how they did.
Even if it wouldn't be a problem of muktzah, it's not a kiddush Hashem. I wouldn't recommend people do that. You recommend invite them out and have them, do something Shabbos and make it a positive experience and try to be mashpia on them. Yeah, they have to leave, but once when they used to have the hospice unit here, the inpatient, one sukkos, I was holding my lulav and esrog, walking there for the patients, and as I was driving, I was walking. A guy who was driving was looking at me. I looked at him. He pulls out. He pulls off to the side. He takes a keep out of his glove compartment. He says, like I'm an idiot for working today, but can I make a bracha on the lulav? And he read the Hebrew. He was able to read the Hebrew. I had it I wrote it before Yantif to transliterate it, but there's on Yantif that happened to me once. Okay, so Gemara, but my askinan, what's the case of this chicken? Why aren't we allowed to use the egg on Shabbos according to Beis Hillel? If we're talking about a chicken or a hen that's going to be eaten, my tamayel Beis Hillel. What's the reason of Beis Hillel who say that you're not allowed to eat it on Yantif? Uchla de efrasu. It's this. So since the chicken is edible, meaning because the chicken could either be raised because you want to eat chickens and you're raising the chickens to slaughter the chickens eventually, or you have chickens to lay the eggs. So if you have chickens to lay the eggs, then you couldn't use the chicken on Shabbos because on Yantif, because you don't shaft your chickens. So there would be it has no purpose for you on Yantif. So if it's a chicken that you're gonna harvest is the euphemism, I guess, because it's agriculture, so that you're gonna chef the chicken eventually. Who cares that the egg came out of the chicken? It's something that's separated from the food. And so a food that separates from food is still food. So according to Beis Hillel, why couldn't you eat the egg? What's wrong with it? Ela b'ternagolos homedes lagad al beitzim. So and then if you say, so this would be better according to Beis Hillel, that we're talking about a chicken that you have it in order to lay eggs. So the chicken itself is muktzah when Yantif starts. So therefore the egg, which hadn't been laid yet when Yantif starts, is muktzah, just like its source was muktzah. But then the question is, my tamayot Beis Shammai, muktzah. So then how could Beis Shammai says you're allowed to use it because it is muktzah? So that's the question. What kind of chicken are we talking about here? So now the Gemara answers a very Jewish way. It answers the question with the question. My kushya. Well, why is it even a question? Dilma Beis Shammai leis lehu muktzah. Maybe Beis Shammai doesn't hold a muktzah. So it doesn't literally mean it doesn't hold a muktzah, but it has a very lenient opinion of muktzah.
What is the literal translation of muktzah?
Muktzah, I would say, is it's put aside for a specific purpose. So if something, it's a passive term. The vav, the muktzah, makes it puel, intensive, passive. Arkady can tell you much better than me about it, but it's a passive term. So in note 16, the very last paragraph on 2A1, the term itself, muktzah, literally means set aside and refers to a class of objects whose use on Shabbos or Yantiv is unanticipated. In the main, the restrictions of muktzah concern carrying or moving them. Total muktzah. That normally say something muktzah, you can't touch it because it's muktzah. So let's say, money or electronics, things like that. Oh, it's muktzah. Because it has no purpose on Shabbos, it's set aside. We don't use it. Or its purpose is not a Shabbos purpose, so we don't use it.
So is it muktzah you can't touch it or you can't move it?
Normally we talk about moving, but I mean to go like this. Well, depending on it is. If it's, let's say we mentioned the telescope or the shechita knife,
Right.
things like that, I don't think you'd be able to touch at all. But other things, once they're there, you may not be able to touch. And we'll see in a few minutes that if you have a muktzah thing on something, the whole thing couldn't be moved because of the muktzah item on top of it. So the Gemara is saying, well, the whole reason that we have a question right now is because we're assuming that everyone agrees of muktzah. So if the hen is only to lay eggs, so the hen itself has no purpose for us on Yantiv because we can't pick it up to shechted or whatever, which pets on Shabbos and Yantiv is a big issue in and of itself. But we're assuming that it's muktzah. So we're saying, well, maybe Beis Shammai has a very lenient view of muktzah. So even according to him, it could be a chicken whose purpose is to lay eggs, and there's not a problem of muktzah because he's a very lenient opinion of muktzah. They have a lenient opinion of muktzah. My kusha dilma Beis Shammai leisul muktzah. Maybe Beis Shammai don't have a strict definition of muktzah, and therefore the egg could be eaten. So the Gemara doesn't like this and says, we go to 2A2, because we hold even if you allow muktzah, benolad aser, when it's something that's a newly established issue, then it's forbidden. And my tamayid Beis Shammai, and therefore the Gemara asks, what is the reason of Beis Shammai that allow you to use the egg? So nolad means something was born. So if something happened on Shabbos, it wasn't there before Shabbos or before Yantif, it's nolad. So the egg that got laid is nolad. It didn't exist before when Yantif started. I think some say it is also if it snowed on Shabbos, the snow is nolad. I mean, you could step on it, but shouldn't make snowballs with it. Some say if you make snowballs, you're causing it to melt partially, and that's also not our issue. Okay, so my tamal de Beis Shammai. So Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Nachman, Liola b'Tarnagol Samedas Agada Beitza, v'de Islay Mukta Islay Nolad, v'Leislay Mukta Leislay Nolad. So Rav Nachman says the chickens, you own the chickens in order to raise eggs, so they are mukta on Yantif. And the opinion who holds of mukta also holds a problem that when something nolad, something new is newly born or newly produced on Yantif or on Shabbos is forbidden because it didn't exist when Shabbos or Yantif starts. Udeleisle mukta leisle nolad, and according to the opinion that rejects the big definition of muktzah does not have a problem of nolad either. And Beishamai Krib Shimon Beisil Krib Yehuda. Beishamai passing like Reb Shimon and Beisil agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. So it's a big machlokas throughout the Gemara in the Shabbos. That Rabbi Yehuda is very strict on muktzah, and Rabbi Shimon is much more lenient. He agrees there's the idea of muktzah, but is much more lenient. So if something, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if something was muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos, it's muktzah for the whole Shabbos. But Rabbi Shimon holds if it was muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos, but the reason for why it's muktzah is over now, then it's not muktzah anymore. So the leisle muktzah leisne nolad, the opinion who doesn't have muktzah, it's not a problem for something that's newly developed. So the egg being born, so even though the chicken was muktzah, but because the egg is now separated from it, it's not muktzah because nolad depends on muktzah, and Beishamai Paskin is the lenient way about muktzah, so this egg is allowed to be eaten. So that's how Rav Nachman explains the Mishnah. So the default opinion is that Beis makes more sense. It is a problem of muktzah because these chickens are being raised for their eggs. So the chicken itself is muktzah. But the answer is Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Shimon. So once the egg separates from the chicken, you could lose the status of muktzah on Shabbos, and nolad isn't an issue. So the Gemara has a question about this. So Miyamar Rav Nachman Hachi, did Rav Nachman really say this? That Beis Shammai holds like the lenient opinion in regard to muktzah, like Rabbi Shimon? But we learned in a Mishnah in Shabbos, Beis Shammai Omrim Magbin Me'al Shulchan Atzmos Uklipin. You can pick up bones and shells on Shabbos. So meaning if you had chicken, you had garinim, you had nuts with shells and stuff. So you ate the chicken, everything to the bone. So you had just bones left. You ate your nuts and you had all the nut out of it, and the shells are still there. So those are muktzah now. There's nothing that you could do with those things. So Beis Shammai says you're allowed to move them, to throw them out on Shabbos, even though these have no purpose anymore. Beis Hillel Omer Mesalkes Atavlo Kula Menara. Beis Hillel says you should pick up the whole slab. And if you tip it up, everything will fall off. So Beis Hillel holds you're not allowed to touch the individual muktzah, but because the slab of your table itself is something useful, you can move that, and by default, but automatically the other stuff is going to fall off, and that's how you can clean your table on Shabbos. The Amar of Nachman, and Rav Nachman says, Ein alonu ela Beis Shammai Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Nachman says Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Beis Hillel Rabbi Shimon, and Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Shimon. So, meaning Rav Nachman says he felt that the Girsa, the text of the Mishnah, was backwards because his tradition was that Beis Shammai held like Rabbi Yehuda, which is the stricter opinion of muktzah, and Beis Hillel held like Rabbi Shimon, which was a more lenient opinion of muktzah. So Rav Nachman felt that the Mishnah that you had to switch the two opinions, and Beis Shammai had the stricter opinion that you couldn't move the shells or the bones themselves. You had to pick up the slab and let the garbage fall off. And Beis Hillel was a lenient opinion, like Reb Shimon, that you're able to actually move the bones and the nutshells themselves. So we have an explicit statement that Rav Nachman holds in regard to Shabbos that Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Yehuda, the stricter opinion. So it doesn't make sense that Rav Nachman would explain that on Yantif, Beis Shammai would have the more lenient opinion like Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, Rav Nachman would tell you, Gabi Shabbos Desasim Latana Rabbi Shimon, by Shabbos that there's a stam mishna. Stam mishna means the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, when he wrote the Mishnah, compiled the Mishnah, he wrote this Mishnah without any opinion. It's an anonymous Mishnah. So when there's an anonymous Mishnah, we usually pass on like the anonymous Mishnah. So in regard to Shabbos, there's an anonymous Mishnah which we know from other places, it's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. It's not, because we have a Mishnah very near the very end of Shabbos. You can cut up squashes or zucchinis in front of an animal on Shabbos for eat. So nevela is let's say an animal that died either of natural causes or it could have had a certain issue for a shechita, or you shechted it and you found that that would normally be called a treifa, but meaning an animal that was dead that we can't eat. So it's treifa for us. You can cut it up and give it to a dog on Shabbos, even though the nevela for the most part is muktzah. And I think these squashes that we're talking about feeding to the animal, no, Rashi says they were already picked, but we don't say that you're doing something that's a terchav that there's no need to. And in regard to this animal that died, Rashi says that it died on Shabbos. So when Shabbos started, it was alive, but now that it died, so when Shabbos started, it wasn't the dog food because it was still alive. When it dropped out on Shabbos, or maybe it got into a fight with another animal, got killed on Shabbos, whatever, you can cut it up and give it to the animals. We don't say that it's muktzah. Mokim la leveis Hillel Rabbi Shimon. So from that anonymous Mishnah, we hold that Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Shimon. Aval, as we turn to Beis Amid Beis, Gabi Yantav the Stam la Katana Rabbi Yehuda. But by Yantif, there's a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda, which is the stricter opinion. Did not, because we learned in a Mishnah much later on, Ein bevakin eitzim in a koros. You can't cut wood from your beams. You ran out of firewood or wood for your oven to cook your food. You can't cut a little bit off of your beam of your house, or now that then those days they had exposed beams. Nowadays that would only be true if you're in a lodge, I guess. Velomina korish and nishbra b'yom tov, or not from a beam that already broke on Yantif. So those are not there for firewood. They're there for your house when Yantif started. They're not firewood. Mukim leveis Hillel Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, Beis Hillel, their regular opinion, must paskin like that regular anonymous Mishnah, which is strict in regard to Yantif. So basically, it's a very interesting, not so usual case that in regard to muktzah, in general, we're more lenient on Shabbos than we are on Yantif. But for whatever reason, Beis Shammai is lenient on Yantif and strict on Beis Shammai is lenient on Yantif. So the way that we paskin like is the strict opinion, not like Beis Shammai in regard to Yantif. So now the Gemara says, Mifti, let's analyze this. Man Sasme, who made the anonymous Mishnahs? Rabbi, it was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. We've mentioned many times that it's a machlokas whether Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, when he composed the text, he actually composed it as a written text even then, because because if they wouldn't have written it down, Torah Shabbat Peh would have been forgotten. But some say when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi composed it, they didn't write it down, but because Torah Shabbat Peh is more of an infinite thing, it's to even make an oral text was limiting, and so he used the heter of Eis Lasos Lashem even to make an oral text of Torah Shabbat Peh, but at that time it was not yet written. Either way, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi composed the Mishnah, whether he composed it in a written form or in an oral form, it doesn't matter. He composed the Mishnah. Ma'ishna b'Shabbos desasim like Rabbi Shimon, u'ma'ishna b'Yom Tov desasim Rabbi Yehuda. Why is it seems to be inconsistent? Why doesn't he pass in the same way on Shabbos and on Yantif? Why are we more lenient for Muktzah on Shabbos? And why are we more strict for Yantif for Muktzah on Yantif? So Amri, they said, Shabbos tachmir v'lo asil zuzlebe. Shabbos is more strict, whether it's because there are more halachos, whether because the punishment is more strict. People aren't going to be lax in the following the muktzah laws of Shabbos. Sasim like Rabbi Shimon Demeka. Rabbi Huda Nasi paskin like Rabbi Shimon, who's more lenient in regard to muktzah on Shabbos. But Yom Tov the kill v'asil zuzlebe. Yom Tov is more lenient in general. We're able to, again, whether it's because the punishments aren't so severe, there's no death penalty for violating the melachos on Yantif, or it's because we're able to do more stuff on Yantif. So we're able to do some of the food preparations and cooking on Yantif. We might try to push the envelope and do a little bit more. And so that we had to be stricter on Yantif. Sasim like Rabbi Yehuda de Ma'achmer. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi made the Stam Mishnah, the anonymous Mishnah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and was very strict in regard to Muktzah on Yantif. So that's the logic for why Muktzah is more lenient on Shabbos and stricter on Yantif. So B'mayu Kimte. So let's just review and make sure we understand things right, and not have a question about how Rav Nachman is explaining our Mishnah. B'mayu Kimte, how did he establish our Mishnah? We're talking about a chicken or a hen who you own it in order to have eggs from it, and the problem or the potential problem of using it on Yantif is muktzah. This was set aside for eggs, so therefore it wasn't. You couldn't eat it on Yantif because it wasn't a food. It wasn't to be used for food. So the problem is that the egg that would because it's muktzah, the egg that would come from it is also muktzah. But hihachi at the miflagi bebeitza liflugu betarnagolas. The same way that Beisham and Beisil argue about the egg that this chicken lays, why don't they argue about the chicken itself? Because we mentioned that according to the lenient opinion of muktzah, something can stop being muktzah on Shabbos if the reason it was muktzah was ended. So let's say your an animal, your chicken that you had ready for Yantif fell and it was it fell and but it's not edible anymore. So now that the one that you prepared for Shabbos isn't good, I mean for Yantif isn't good. So even though that's my egg, my champion egg laying hen, I need a chicken for Yantif, so I'll shecht it now. So I can say it's needed for Yantif now, and I can shecht it on Yantif. So why don't we say that according to Beishama, in the case of need, you could even shecht the animal, the chicken itself on Yantif, and not just use the egg that it lays. So the Gemara says, Odicha kochan de Beishamai. So the Mishnah wants to tell you that to how lenient Beishamai is, Lodicha kochan literally means to let you know the strength or the power of Beishamai de Benola Shari. So we already know, according to them, that when something was muktzah, it could become unmuktzah on Shabbos or on Yantif under certain situations. But you might think that nolad, this thing that didn't exist when Shabbos says, when Shabbos or when Yantif started, there's no way that would be mutter. So the Mishnah is specifically telling us about the egg to show how lenient Beishamai is. Even about in regard to nolad, they're lenient. So the Gemara asks, "V'lifluga b'tarnagolas." So still, let the Mishnah argue about tell us in Machloket Beishamai about the chicken itself. Lodiacha kochan de Beis Hillel de b'muktzah asri, in order to tell us the power of Beis Hillel that they were so strict. Even so it's true that the egg that this chicken laid is usher, but maybe the chicken itself wouldn't be so usher, because at least that chicken existed when Yantif started. The egg didn't, so that could be extra strict because of the issue of nolad. So if the issue of nolad doesn't exist, because we're talking about the chicken itself, still Rabbi Hillel are so machmir that they wouldn't allow you to shech the chicken under any situation. So let us still, the Mishnah tell us that they're arguing about the chicken and the egg to tell us how strict Beis Hillel is. We just said why we don't want to say how lenient Beis Shammai is, but to tell us how strict Beis Hillel is. The chitema koch detera adif, and if you want to say that the power of making a leniency is better, so it's better for us to issue to talk about Beis Shammai's opinion to show how lenient they are, and it's more important to show how lenient they are versus how strict Beis Hillel is. So let the Mishnah mention both cases, not just the chicken, not just the egg. Talk about the chicken and the egg. Which came first, chicken or the egg? No, just kidding. So the Mishnah should have said as follows: Tarnagolas homedis legato Beitzim, a hen that you own in order for it to lay eggs for you. Hiu Beitzasa. So what's the halacha about shechting it itself, and what's the halacha about using its egg that it laid on Shabbos? Beis Shammai omrim teachel. Beis Shammai says they both can be eaten if you shech the chicken or you just want to crack the egg. Beis Hillel omrim lo teachel. Beis Hillel says the chicken itself can't be eaten and the egg that it lays can't be eaten either. So the Gemara is not liking Rav Nachman's opinion because if according to Rav Nachman it should have said this and it didn't. Okay. So Ela Amar Rabba. So Rabba gives a different answer to avoid these problems. Liolam ternagolos homedes la'achila. We're talking about a hen who you have to eat. So if you could eat the hen, we said something that comes from food is also food. So the egg that came from it should be able to be eaten. So why does Beis Hillel say that you can't eat it? We're talking about a case where Yom Tov fell on Sunday. Umishum hachana, and the reason why Beis Hillel prohibits us from using the egg is because of this, because of hachana, which means preparation. So, what this means here is the Gemara is going to say, because Sava Rabba and Rabba holds kol beitza de misyalda ha'idna me'esmal gamrla. Any egg that's born today or comes out today, it was already fully formed yesterday inside the chicken. Now, in regard to, there's a whole Yordea question, when does an egg become parav? So if you sheft a chicken and you find eggs inside of it, if it didn't get laid, would it be considered meat, just like any other part of the chicken, or is it become... So the women had a chumrah that's beyond what the halacha is, but in general, I don't remember the detail. I haven't looked up the details recently, but if there's a hard shell around it, even if it hadn't been laid yet, we consider it parav, that it's already separated from the chicken, even though it hadn't been laid yet. And if it doesn't have a hard shell yet, it's a fleshig egg. But in Hilchos Bas Barchav, where it talks about, I mean, there is a thing, if you hit the chicken and the egg comes out, I think you're not allowed to eat it because it's considered Aver Min Achai, that you tore a limb off of a living animal, but you're not allowed to eat. So the egg, which is laid today on Yontif, it was prepared on Shabbos already. Rabbi Tamei, and Rabbi holds his own svara, or he's consistent. He has a certain opinion in regard to other things also. The Amar Rabba says, Mahu diksiv vayaba yom hashishi bechino es asher yaviyu, and it is on the sixth day they will prepare that which they will bring. So that's a pasuk by the Mon in Parshas B'Shalach, that on Friday they were going to get double portion of the Mon. Chol mechin l'Shabbos. On the sixth day, you could prepare on the sixth day for Shabbos. V'chol mechin l'Yontiv, and on a weekday you're allowed to prepare for Yontiv. Ve'ein Yontov mechin l'Shabbos, you can't prepare on Shabbos for Yontiv. Ve'ein Shabbos mechin l'Yontov, and you can't prepare on Yontiv from Shabbos. So in this case, because the egg itself was formed inside the chicken on Shabbos, Beis Shammai holds it's muktzah for that reason. If it would be a regular Yontif, Beis Shammai would agree that you could use the eggs, but because today is Sunday Yantif, and yesterday was Shabbos, so the egg was definitely muktzah on Shabbos when it was fully formed, and that's why. So
You can't do preparation on Yom Tov and Shabbos.
So we're going to learn in the second parak. I think it's the second parak. Well, you can't without what we call the Erev Tavshilin. But without the Erev Tavshilin, you're not allowed to, and we'll see if Rabbi agrees with that or not. So that's how he explains the Mishnah. Amarle Abaye said to Rava Elamayata, according to you, Yom Tov Alma Tishtari. According to that, if, which I already kind of already said this, if on a regular Yantif day, according to Beis Shammai, you would be able to eat the egg that was laid on that day, because it's a chicken that you own to lay eggs. Excuse me, to shacht. So it's not muktzah. So if an egg was born, it would be mutter. So according to Abaye, according to that, it ends up that an egg that was laid on a regular yantif from a hen that you own to shecht, that you're raising it to shecht, you would be allowed to eat that egg on Shabbos. So Rabbi says Gzera mishum yantif achar Shabbos. Rabbi says you would not be allowed to eat that egg on yantif because of Gzera. What happens if yantif would be on Sunday and you wouldn't be allowed to eat that egg? So therefore, you're never allowed to eat. It's a rabbanon. It's a rabbinic decree that you're never allowed to eat an egg that was laid on Shabbos, because maybe yantif would have been Sunday and you couldn't eat that egg. So we never eat an egg that was laid on yantif. Shabbos the Alma Tishtari. You can't eat it until after yantif is over.
Yeah.
You can't eat the egg that was laid that day on yantif. You could wait till that night and eat it.
Can you touch it? Can you put it in the fridge or whatever?
Lester was out, I think, near like Belvedere or something, and the lady gave him fresh eggs, and she said they come with this coating, so you just leave them out. If you would wash them off, then you need to put them in the refrigerator. In Israel, the eggs they don't go in the refrigerator. So I guess our eggs we need to put in the refrigerator. They must wash it off or something. But the way that the chickens lay the eggs naturally has a coating on there, and you don't need to put them in the refrigerator. But if it's muktzah to eat, can you touch it? I don't know. But the Abaye asks again, Shabbos the Alma Tishtari. So according to that, though, an egg that was laid on Shabbos, you should be able to eat also because it was ready on Friday. What you're just saying. So Gzer mishum Shabbos achar yantif. So no, we say you can't eat it on Shabbos either, because what happens if yantif would be on Friday and Shabbos would be Shabbos, the day after yantif? So if the egg got laid on Shabbos, but it was formed on yantif, so ein yantif mechina l'Shabbos, and Shabbos mechina l'Yom, so there's a gzera you couldn't eat it then either. Then Abaye says, "Umi gazrina, do we make such a gzera? V'hatani, we learned in the Beitza. Hashochet is a tarnagolos of matzah b'beitzim gemuros. If you shechted a chicken and you found fully formed eggs inside of it, you're allowed to eat them on yantif. So it's talking about shechting it on yantif. The im isa, and if according to what you're saying that there's a gzera that you're not allowed to, ligzar mishum hanach to misyalda b'yomehem. So you shouldn't be allowed to eat these eggs that you found when you shechted the hen on Shabbos, because if you can't eat it that it lays, if it would lay the egg, then you shouldn't eat it the egg even if it never got laid, but you shechted the chicken and found the eggs in there on Shabbos. What happens to be the halacha would be is that if the eggs are fleishik eggs, you'd have to salt them also. Just FYI. So Amarle, Rabbi said, Beitzim gemuras b'meiman milsadol shchichahi. To find a fully formed egg inside the mother is an uncommon thing. Milsadol shchicha lo gazer be'Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan, the sages did not make decrees on uncommon situations. Okay, so that was Rav Nachman was explanation number 1 in the Mishnah. Rabbi was answer number 2. That it's talking about a case where yantif was on a Sunday, and so there's muktzah because and any egg that was laid today was already fully formed yesterday, so it was muktzah from Shabbos. And then in all these other cases, you wouldn't be allowed to eat the egg that was laid because of a gezerah, is rabbinic enactment. Rav Yosef has a third opinion. Rav Yosef Amar Gzer Mishum Peres Hanoshim. So really, midiraisa, you would be allowed to eat an egg that was laid on Shabbos, but there's a gzera because you're not allowed to eat it. Because you're not, just like we can't eat fruit that fell off from the tree themselves on Shabbos. So from this, we see we're not allowed to pick an apple or something on Shabbos. So Beis Hillel, who says you're not allowed to eat it, is because they hold it's like fruit that falls off a tree by itself on Shabbos, that you're not allowed to eat it. And at this point, the Gemara is holding that this is a rabbinic gzeira, that something that comes out of the chicken is analogous to fruit that falls off a tree that you're not allowed to eat on Shabbos. So because you're not allowed to eat it on Shabbos, we make a gzeira that you can't have the egg on Yantif either. That's why Beis Hillel is strict. Amarle Abaye asked, Peros Hanoshim Taimamai. But what's the reason that fruits that fall off the tree on Shabbos themselves cannot be eaten? As returned to Gilam Aleph, Gzera Shema Yala V'Yilosh. There's a gzera that you shouldn't want to go up on a tree and pick it yourself. So picking a fruit or a vegetable on Shabbos is a form of harvesting, one of the 39 malachos. So if you're able to pick one that freshly fell, you might want to just pick one off yourself. So we say no. If it's near the tree, you can't do it. Obviously, if you picked it before Shabbos, then it's already picked. But if it wasn't picked before Shabbos, even if it fell by itself, you can't have it. Whether that's a form of muktzah, it's probably well, it seems that it's not a muktzah avera, but it's this gzera that if you'd be allowed to eat that freshly fallen produce, you might pick your own fresh produce, which is definitely a diraisa. So he gufa gzera. So the fact that you're not allowed to eat a freshly fallen fruit on Shabbos is a gzera. It's a decree to distance ourselves from doing an avera. Maybe you'll pick a fresh one yourself. And then we're going to make a decree on the decree. So to say, because we're worried about fruits that fell off the tree on Shabbos, you're not allowed to have, we're making another gezerah that a chicken that laid an egg on Shabbos, you're not allowed to eat that egg. So there's a halacha. So a gezerah is to make a fence around the Torah. So as much as we want to make fences around the Torah, as we say in the first Mishnah Perkei Avos, there's a principle: you don't make a fence around the fence. If something is already only a fence, we don't make a double fence around it. Now it happens to be there's a famous Gemara in Avodah Zarah that we have to be strict, but we have to have the following thing in mind when we make a fence. Why did how did the Nachash trick Chava? So there were two trees. One tree they weren't allowed to eat from the tree. But Adam told Chava, don't even touch it. So Chava told the snake, I can't touch it. So what did the snake do? The snake pushed Chava and she touched it. He said, look, nothing happened. You touch it. So you could eat it. Nothing's going to happen either. So if you don't realize that what you're doing is only gzera, it's going to pervert your whole sense of what actually is allowed and not allowed. So when we make gzera, according to the Rambam's opinion, how are the Chachamim ever able to make a gzera? The Torah says you can't change the Torah. So how could we make right? So the Rambam's answer is that when the Chachamim say you can't do this, the Chachamim are very clear. The Torah allows us, but in order to strengthen the Torah, we're saying that you can't pick a fruit that fell. Because if we let you do that, you might actually pick a fruit yourself, which is definitely a malacha. So they're very clear that they're not making a new mitzvah. They're doing it. It's not forbidden on the Torah law, but they're doing it to strengthen the Torah law. The Ramban's opinion is that the Chachamim made an asmachta. They interpreted a pasuk in a way that gave them authority to later on make a drasha. But according to the Rambam's opinion, it's an important thing. So to tell a kid you can't do that on Shabbos, it is important to know that some things are diraisa and some things are dirabanan. Not to be makel on the dirabanan, but it's important to know what's diraisa and what's only dirabanan. So the Gemara says, Kula chada gzeira hi. No, it's all one decree. We don't want you to pick something derice on Shabbos, so you can't take the fruit that fell itself. You can't take an egg that got laid on Shabbos. It's not that the picking eating a fruit that detached itself on Shabbos is one gzera, and then the not eating the egg that was laid on Shabbos is gzera. It's all one gzera that we can't harvest stuff ourselves on Shabbos. So there's going to be another answer, but it's time for mincha. We'll save that for next week, God willing. Actually,